imagine your neighbor, someone say hello to every morning, suddenly part of a mob outside your shop, all because of a rumor. It's chilling, and that's basically what happened in Nainital recently.
Yeah, it's a deeply unsettling scenario.
So today we're taking a really hard look at these communal tensions that just, well, exploded in what seemed like a peaceful town. And it all started after a very troubling allegation.
Right. And for this deep dive, we've gathered quite a bit of material. We've got the on-the-ground reports from Nainital, the immediate aftermath.
Okay.
But we're also looking wider at analyses of communal violence in India generally. Like, what is it legally? What are the tangled roots, the causes? And, what's the government trying to do about it?
And specifically recent data, too, right, from this year.
Exactly. We're drilling down into specific reports tracking communal riots and also the horror of mob lynching across India, specifically in 2024.
Okay, so our mission here isn't just to, rehash the headlines. We really want to get underneath it, understand the deeper currents driving this violence. What are the hidden triggers? Are there ways out of this?
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, how does this recent trouble in Nainital fit into that bigger and frankly, quite disturbing picture? All right, let's start with Nainital. What exactly happened? What was the sequence of events?
So the flashpoint, the incident that really sparked it all, happened on April 30th, 2025. A complaint was filed with the police by the family of a 12-year-old girl.
Okay.
And the allegation was devastating: rape. The accused, named in the complaint, was a 65-year-old Muslim man named Usman.
Right, and the immediate aftermath.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just a legal process kicking off, was it? Things escalated quickly.
Tragically, yes. Very quickly. As soon as the complaint was filed and Usman was arrested, the reaction in Nainital was swift and violent. Protests started, sure, but they pretty quickly morphed into something, well, much uglier. Groups took to the streets, and reports say they specifically targeted shops, eateries, businesses owned by people from the minority community. There were accounts of vandalism, even stones being thrown at a local mosque.
Wow. So it immediately jumped from an accusation against one individual to targeting a whole community.
Precisely. The anger, maybe initially directed at the accused, was instantly misdirected. It took on that communal edge almost immediately.
That's really frightening. What was the official response? The police, the authorities?
Well, the police did act swiftly to arrest Usman, the accused. They also brought in additional forces, more police presence in Nainital to try and manage the situation, regain control.
Okay.
The city superintendent of police also made public statements, assurances that they'd take strict action against anyone involved in the violence, trying to project authority, reassure people.
Must have been incredibly tense if they needed such strong public assurances.
Oh, absolutely. The tension was palpable, so much so that schools, colleges, even the local markets in Nainital, they all had to shut down.
Really? So daily life just stops?
Completely disrupted. For everyone. It just shows how deeply the social fabric was torn and how quickly.
It's vital we hear all sides. What was the response from within the Muslim community there to the initial crime allegation and then the violence that followed?
That's a crucial point. The Anjuman Islamiyah Committee, which is a prominent Muslim organization in Nainital, they came out very strongly. They unequivocally condemned the alleged sexual assault.
Yep.
They expressed complete solidarity with the young girl and her family. But importantly, they didn't stop there. They also strongly denounced the vandalism, the attack on the mosque.
Right, so they condemned both.
Exactly. They made it crystal clear they stood against all violence, all disruption of harmony. And they called for swift justice for the perpetrators of, well, both the alleged crime and the subsequent violence.
That's a really powerful message, rejecting any attempt to, blame an entire community for one person's alleged actions.
Absolutely. And adding to that, the senior superintendent of police, Prahlad Meena, he also put out a video statement. He reiterated the investigation was ongoing, assured strict legal action against the accused. The idea was to reassure everyone, try to calm things down, discourage any more violence or retaliation.
Okay. So this awful incident acts like a spark, igniting these immediate volatile communal tensions. But like you said, to really understand Nainital, we need to zoom out. Look at communal violence in India more broadly. What does that term actually mean, like in a legal sense?
Sure. So the Indian Penal Code, the IPC, it gives us a legal definition. Basically, it defines communal violence as acts that intentionally promote enmity, hostility between different groups.
Groups based on religion, mostly.
Primarily religion, yes, but the definition is broader. It includes groups defined by race, place of birth, residence, language, you name it. The key thing is that these actions are harmful, prejudicial to maintaining peace and harmony.
And have there been any sort of updates to that, more recent legal changes?
Yeah, there's the Haratiya Naya Sanhita, the BNS, which is a newer legal framework. It includes Section 196, and that specifically targets actions promoting hatred and disharmony between groups.
Okay.
And what's interesting there is it particularly focuses on offenses happening in places of worship or during religious gatherings, recognizing that these are, potential flashpoints.
Makes sense. And it lays out punishments.
Yes, imprisonment, fines, the usual legal deterrents. It underscores the law's intent to, try and protect social cohesion.
So we have laws, definitions.
Yeah.
But what causes this stuff to erupt in the first place? It feels like it must be, a whole mess of factors, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly multifaceted. You can start with political factors. Sadly, it's not uncommon for political actors to, exploit existing communal feelings for electoral gain.
Right, the whole polarization strategy.
Yeah. Exactly. Communal polarization, amplifying differences, mobilizing voters along religious lines, especially near elections. And if political institutions are weak or seen as biased, they often fail to effectively manage or prevent these conflicts. That can create a sense of, impunity for those stirring the pot.
A really troubling thought, that political gain could trump social harmony. What about the social dynamics within communities themselves?
Yeah, that's huge too. Deep-seated prejudices, stereotypes that have maybe been around for generations, they really erode trust between communities. Then you have extremist groups who often, thrive on creating division, they pour fuel on the fire. And tragically, religious symbols, which should be about peace or spirituality, they sometimes get manipulated, twisted, used to incite hatred.
Like weapons almost.
In a way, yes, turning symbols of faith into tools of division.
Are there economic factors mixed in there as well?
Definitely. Competition for scarce resources, jobs, land, opportunities that can easily become a source of friction between groups.
Right.
Plus, if marginalized groups feel or genuinely experience systemic discrimination based on their religion, that breeds resentment. It creates an environment where tensions can just, bubble up and explode much more easily.
And I suppose even just cultural differences, without any malice, could sometimes lead to misunderstandings.
That's true too. Different values, lifestyles, ways of doing things. Sometimes it leads to a lack of empathy or misinterpretations. The ideal of cultural pluralism, different cultures coexisting, enriching each other, that can be challenged by, say, rising religious conservatism, which might be less tolerant. And we've seen it time and again, even secret sites can become flashpoints. Disputes over perceived desecration or cultural appropriation, things like that, can really inflame passions.
It feels like a really tangled web, so many different threads. Is there one thing, like a common element, that runs through a lot of this?
If there's one underlying element, I'd say it's often a lack of, education in the broad sense, critical thinking, combined with the sheer volume of misinformation floating around.
Misinformation.
Yeah. When people don't have access to reliable information, or maybe lack the skills to critically assess what they're seeing and hearing, they become much more vulnerable. Vulnerable to stereotypes, conspiracy theories, and ultimately manipulation into violence against others. That erosion of trust, fueled by bad information, it's a massive driver.
This whole issue, it has a long shadow, doesn't it? It's not a new problem for India. There's a history here.
A very long and often painful history. You really can't understand the present without acknowledging the past. The British colonial divide and rule policy, for instance, deliberately fostered communal divisions.
Right.
And then the lead up to partition, the two-nation theory, resulted in just horrific, widespread communal violence. Millions displaced, killed. The scars from that period, they absolutely still impact relations today.
Partition was just cataclysmic. Did things get better immediately after independence?
Well, the initial focus was on building a secular nation, promoting education. But communalism, sadly, it resurfaced pretty significantly by the 1960s. Some historians even call that a dangerous decade because of internal conflicts, wars, political instability. It created fertile ground.
Any specific examples from that era?
The Ahmedabad riots in Gujarat in 1969 were a really grim landmark in the post-partition era, driven by a mix of economic and political rivalries. And since then, communal agendas have often become tangled up in Indian politics. This whole idea of vote bank politics, tailoring strategies to appeal to specific religious or caste groups.
It seems like certain events just stand out as these terrible turning points casting long shadows.
Exactly. Think about the tensions in Punjab in the late 70s, early 80s. Operation Blue Star, the anti-Sikh riots in 84, those left incredibly deep wounds. The forced exodus of Kashmiri Pandits in 89-90, driven by communal hatred, another tragedy. And then, of course, the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992.
A huge flashpoint.
Massive. And the widespread violence that followed across the country. You had the Bhagalpur riots back in 89, the Gujarat riots in 2002. These were major events that really deepened religious divides. And it wasn't just cities. Rural areas suffered terribly too, leaving this legacy of fear and mistrust.
So moving closer to the present, what are the more recent trends? Has the nature of communal violence shifted in the last, say, decade or so?
We are seeing some deeply concerning shifts. Maybe fewer massive prolonged riots like in the past, although they still happen. But there's been a disturbing rise in mob lynching incidents.
Right, that seems much more prominent now.
And also smaller scale, but sometimes incredibly intense localized riots. We're also seeing, more communal slogans, more hate speech, both in public and definitely online.
And why the shifts? What are analysts saying?
Many point to the highly polarized political climate, a perception sometimes of state bias, the explosion of hate speech on social media which spreads like wildfire, and frankly, a worrying increase in intolerance, maybe especially among younger people.
And we've seen recent examples of this playing out.
Sadly, yes. The Muzaffarnagar riots in 2013, the Delhi riots in 2020, the new violence just last year in 2023. These show that the potential for large-scale violence is definitely still there.
Okay, let's focus specifically on 2024 then. What does the data tell us about communal riots in the first part of this year? Any specific patterns?
Yeah, the Center for Study of Society and Secularism, CSSS, they monitor this very closely. And their data for early 2024 showed a really significant and frankly concerning surge in communal riots.
A surge? How big?
They documented 59 incidents just in the early part of the year. That's an 84% jump compared to the 32 riots they recorded in all of 2023.
84% increase.
Yeah. And tragically, those 59 incidents led to 13 deaths. What's also striking is the regional concentration. The Western region, particularly Maharashtra, was the epicenter. It accounted for 12 of those 59 riots.
That's a huge jump, and concentrated too. What were these riots like? Were they different from the big historical ones we talked about?
Generally, yes. In 2024, they tended to be mostly low-scale, shorter duration, maybe just a few hours, confined to smaller areas within a town or city.
Okay.
So while the number of deaths, thankfully, might be lower than some past mass incidents, these localized flare-ups still have a big impact. They increase polarization, deepen that us versus them feeling, that communal consciousness.
And less organized, maybe.
That's a key observation. There seemed to be less evidence of the kind of pre-planning and organization seen in some older major riots, what some scholars called institutionalized riot systems. These 2024 incidents often felt more spontaneous, though still incredibly destructive.
You mentioned institutionalized riot systems. What does that actually mean? What kind of planning are we talking about there?
That term describes a much more organized, often politically driven form of communal violence.
Right.
It involved serious pre-planning, things like identifying specific properties, businesses belonging to the target community beforehand,
Right.
deliberately creating specific triggers to set things off, stockpiling weapons, incendiary materials like gas cylinders, and then systematically mobilizing large mobs, often with clear instructions on where to go, who to target, to cause maximum damage and casualties.
Okay, so a much more calculated operation.
Exactly. While we seem to be seeing less of that highly organized pattern in the 2024 data, the fact that seemingly minor things can now escalate so quickly into communal violence suggests that the underlying tension, that communal consciousness, is perhaps more pervasive, easier to ignite.
So if it's less pre-planned, what are the common sparks now? What's triggering these 2024 riots?
A really common trigger observed this year was aggressive, provocative rallies, often during religious festivals accompanied by derogatory, inflammatory slogans shouted in public.
Okay.
And there seems to be a shift. Historically, religious processions might have been more about local faith expression. Now, some are being used quite overtly as displays of political dominance, of hegemony.
Wow.
You see patterns where right-wing groups seem to deliberately try to assert Hindu supremacy in Muslim-majority areas, almost like testing boundaries, showing they can enter and control these spaces. This kind of assertive, often intimidating behavior, it's become a major factor in the recent riots.
That sounds incredibly provocative, designed to cause trouble almost.
Mm-hmm.
Were there other disturbing trends around these riots and how they unfolded or the aftermath?
Yes, a deeply worrying trend is how Muslims sometimes get implicated in criminal cases disproportionately, even when they are the victims of the violence and damage.
How does that work?
Well, for example, even if Hindu right-wing groups are the ones entering a Muslim area aggressively, causing vandalism, you might find a large number of Muslims named in the initial police reports, the FIRs. Yes, often charged with serious offenses. Sometimes investigations even get escalated to national agencies, drawing parallels to terrorist bases. It's this strange, concerning irony where Muslims are often the majority of those injured or killed, their property damaged, yet they also form a large chunk of the accused. It really suggests a potential systemic bias in reporting and investigation.
That completely twists the narrative of victim and perpetrator. What other kinds of triggers were significant in 2024?
Often they reflect these wider communal narratives floating around. The idea of Bangladeshi immigrant infiltration, for instance, that's sometimes invoked even by authorities. Riots in places like Ghaziabad, parts of Maharashtra, were linked to rallies supposedly protesting violence against Hindus in Bangladesh, but often the connection to local issues felt weak.
Okay.
Accusations of love jihad, that dangerous conspiracy theory about forced conversions through marriage, that also served as a trigger in several cases.
Right.
And like we touched on with Nainital, sometimes just simple personal disputes, arguments between individuals from different faiths, get deliberately given a communal twist, and then everything escalates.
It's just awful. And sadly, this isn't just about riots. Mob lynching, that continues to be this dark reality. What did the data show for lynchings in 2024?
Again, looking at the CSSS data for 2024, there were 13 reported incidents of mob lynching across India, utterly tragic events.
How many fatalities?
They resulted in 11 deaths, 9 Muslims, 1 Hindu, and 1 Christian. Now, that number is actually down from the 21 incidents recorded in 2023.
Okay, a decrease, but still.
Exactly. Still 11 people killed in these brutal extrajudicial acts. It's horrifying that they continue at all. The slight decrease might reflect more public scrutiny, maybe the Supreme Court pushing for stricter action, but a disturbing pattern remains, especially around cow vigilantism.
Yes, cow vigilantism. It comes up so often in these discussions. How prevalent was that in the 2024 lynchings?
Shockingly prevalent. Over half, 7 out of the 13 incidents were directly linked to cow vigilantism. Accusations of cow slaughter or just transporting cattle.
7 out of 13.
Yeah, and the examples are just horrific. In Chhattisgarh, Chanmian and Gudukan lynched while transporting buffaloes, not even cows. In Haryana, Sabir, a scrap dealer, killed just on suspicion of eating beef.
Just suspicion.
Just suspicion. Another Haryana case, Aryan Mishra, killed by vigilantes who wrongly thought he was smuggling cows during a car chase. Haji Ashraf Munyor, attacked on a train in Maharashtra, falsely accused of having beef in his lunchbox. Mohammed Hazek, also Maharashtra, attacked after seeing a vehicle hit a cow. Mishra Bala in Gujarat, lynched, likely due to past conflicts over transporting buffaloes. Shahadeen Qureshi in Uttar Pradesh, beaten to death by self-proclaimed vigilantes alleging cow slaughter. It's just a horrifying list fueled by this ideology.
It's hard to even comprehend that level of brutality based on accusations, often false ones, were all the lynchings related to cows.
No, tragically, other motivations were there too, reflecting that wider intolerance. Baseless love jihad accusations led to a Muslim student being lynched in Pune.
Unbelievable.
Muhammad Fareed in Uttar Pradesh lynched over an accusation of theft, though his family believes it was his religious identity. Even trivial things, Muhammad Feroz in UP, beaten to death, accused of entering a house while drunk.
It wasn't just Muslims targeted though, right?
Correct. It highlights the broader issue of mob violence. In Karnataka, Pavan Kumar, Rahul, and Binayak were assaulted just for raising Jai Shri Ram slogans. And a particularly brutal one in Gujarat, Salman Vora lynched after a local cricket match where Muslim players did well. Attackers reportedly used Hindutva slogans, even sports get communalized.
Just awful. Any others?
Yes, Bindu Sodhi in Chhattisgarh was reportedly lynched simply for adopting Christianity. So the triggers are diverse, often flimsy, but the outcome is the same brutal violence, often targeting minorities or those perceived as challenging dominant norms.
This paints such a grim, disturbing picture. What is the government actually doing or trying to do to tackle this deep-rooted problem? And what else needs to happen?
Well, the government does have some measures in place developed over the years. There are the Communal Harmony Guidelines from 2008. They outline preventive steps, administrative actions, monitoring, victim rehabilitation for states.
Okay.
There's the National Foundation for Communal Harmony, NFCH, set up back in '92, which promotes harmony and helps victims financially. Legally, Section 153A of the IPC targets acts promoting enmity between groups.
And anything more recent? Mob lynching specifically?
Yes, the proposed Haratiya Naya Sanhita, the BNS bill, includes a specific provision to tackle mob lynching, potentially with stricter punishments.
But clearly, as Nainital and the 2024 data show, these measures haven't stopped the violence. So what else? What needs to be done?
There's a whole range of interconnected things, really. Strengthening laws against hate speech online and offline and actually enforcing them strictly and impartially, that's critical.
Right, enforcement is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Promoting genuine inter-community dialogue, creating spaces for people to actually talk and understand each other, that's vital for breaking down prejudice.
Grassroots stuff.
Exactly. Community engagement, peace-building initiatives, local conflict resolution, proactive monitoring by state bodies, timely intervention by local administration to stop things escalating. Education is huge, promoting secular values, critical thinking, tolerance from school age upwards.
Makes sense.
Addressing the socioeconomic inequalities too, the sense of marginalization that can fuel resentment. Some suggest civic education reforms emphasizing scientific temper, moral education, regulating media, cultural platforms to curb hate speech, a tricky balance with free expression, but necessary.
What about historical issues?
Addressing historical grievances through independent, credible judicial processes might help heal old wounds. And fundamentally, actively promoting secularism as a core value. Tackling online hate speech needs constant vigilance, monitoring, takedowns, awareness campaigns.
And the police role.
Crucial. Police forces in sensitive areas need to be representative of the community structure, and they absolutely need proper sensitization training on handling these situations impartially, strengthening local peace committees, maybe codes of conduct for festivals, acting fast against rumors and inflammatory speeches, prompt media briefings by authorities, and ensuring timely, adequate relief and rehabilitation for victims. It's a massive, multi-pronged effort needed from everyone.
It really feels like a monumental task and an urgent one. Requires everyone pulling together.
It is complex, deeply challenging, but absolutely essential. Everything we've discussed in Nainital, the wider trends, the lynchings, they're stark reminders of how fragile harmony can be and why these sustained efforts are so desperately needed.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the absolute key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the main things are, communal violence in India isn't simple. It's deeply rooted, complex, with a long, painful history. It shows up in many ways: subtle discrimination, hate speech, all the way to brutal riots and lynchings.
And Nainital fits into this.
Nainital is a recent, stark example of how volatile things remain, how easily tensions can be ignited, often fueled by bad information and manipulation of religious feelings.
And just looking at the surface events, that's not enough, is it?
Absolutely not. You have to understand the interplay of the underlying causes, the politics, the social prejudices, the economic factors, the cultural narratives. Without grasping those roots, trying to fix the problem will just be scratching the surface. It won't work long term.
So it's much more than just a law and order problem. It needs a fundamental shift.
Precisely. Lasting peace needs a multifaceted approach. Yes, laws and government action, but also real proactive community efforts, building trust, fostering understanding, challenging prejudice at every level. It's truly a shared responsibility.
Right, and considering everything we've discussed, the prevalence, the changing nature of these incidents, it really forces you to ask, doesn't it? What fundamental shifts, deep changes in how we think as a society and how we govern ourselves are most urgently needed? How do we build an India where this kind of violence is just unthinkable?
That's the core question.
It's something we all need to reflect on and act on. If you found this deep dive valuable, if it gave you a clearer picture of this really complex issue, please do hit that like button. Share the video with others who might benefit. And hey, if you're not subscribed yet, this is what we do here. We delve into the important, sometimes difficult topics, giving you analysis that goes beyond the headlines.
Yeah, we try to get beneath the surface.
So don't miss out on future deep dives. Hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community. We release these regularly, so there's always more to explore. Thanks so much for watching.